also a dancer. So my sign name is actually Sarah, because I'm a dancer. But people know me from all different walks of life. I'm also an audiologist. If you don't know what that is, that's just basically like a specialized doctor for hearing. So you know when you like go to the optician for eyes, you go to the audiologist for ears, and that is what I am. So yeah, I do a lot of things. But today I'll be sharing a spoken word with you, and the title is Black Imaginations, and I hope you like it. Being black automatically makes me a dreamer, because already my blackness is ingrained with the harsh realities that my ancestors faced. But with their trauma that I have gained are also their ambitions and dreams that in this lifetime I can only hope to obtain. Life is riddled with destinies and mysteries that we cannot escape nor change, also I've been told. Because of my DNA, I'm constantly being forcefully molded and shaped as a way to remain contained and unknowingly trained to never look beyond life's plane or to explore the utmost capabilities of my intellectual capacity. Ambition is frowned upon, but only when it starts to threaten the systems in place. Challenging those very same systems and snapping the invisible line in our minds that have been meticulously created over time is a feat that many have tried, thus weakening the line and building the knowledge and wisdom needed to free our minds. Keep towing that line. If you haven't already, start. We have the key to unlock our imagination, to unlock our potential, and to rid ourselves of the line keeping us in line. Imagination is when you remove the mind's limitations and delve into another dimension. Maneuvering between alternative realities and allowing yourself to see all the different possibilities that you can achieve does not require you to be asleep in a dream. But a dream will only remain as a dream if that's all you perceive it to be. Amending your life path comes from believing in what you imagine yourself to be and taking control of authoring your own story. Giving voice to your dreams and discussing what can be can make them a reality. Sharing your dreams and fantasies could also trigger your healing, as well as removing your mental ceiling. Speak life into your imaginations, and you could very well bridge the gap between your reality and your fantasy. Imagination isn't just for creation, it's also for your own education. Through imagining different perspectives and ideologies, you learn to live life differently. You learn to see life differently. Nothing happens without a dream and imagination, but you also must bring it to fruition. Allow your mind to run wild. Take a trip to the furthest corners. Indulge yourself. Immerse yourself. Own your imaginations and ambitions. Never let yourself always remain a dreamer though. Become a doer. Imaginations will never be transformations if you never act on them. Somewhere in the chaos of your subconscious, you'll find your peace. Let your imagination take the lead. Escape and transform your reality through your dreams. Black imaginations aren't just fascinations, they're innovations, renovations. They promise elevation and equalization. They're a form of retribution as well as restoration. Black imaginations are manifestations, revelations. They're our foundations. And that is why we are inundated with limitations.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was beautiful. Okay, so next we have our incredible panel on. We've got this panel, and then this afternoon we've got our final keynote. So this is the last panel, but then we have a keynote session. But for now, please give a very warm welcome to the chair of our panel, the incredible Nancy Adimora, founder of Other Stories.
perfectly in terms of what we're talking about today. So I would love to invite the entire panel to just come up so I'm not awkwardly here by myself. So please make your way to the stage. Thank you so much. I don't want my dad. Thank you so much. Okay. And so we have Maame, we have Dean, we have Ekow, and they're all going to speak to us individually about their books, but also this theme and what it means to them. So before I start, I just wanted to kind of give some housekeeping. So just remember that you can grab a copy of the book outside, and the books will be signed by the mezzanine. Also, we've heard about the importance of filling out the form, so please kind of fill out the form as well, and share what you've enjoyed about the event. There's a hashtag, which is #TottenhamLitFest, and then you can tag the BG Arts Centre as well. But we'll go straight into it. I'm trying to think about who I should start with first. I think, Maame, I'm going to start with you first. I would love for you to just tell us a bit about your work, your creative practice, and specifically about the book that we're focusing on now, The Rest of You. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Maame. My book is The Rest of You, it's just here, just came out, very excited. My creative process is, in a nutshell, if I'm writing, I need to be on the move. I need to be somewhere probably away from home. I need some kind of new space to get things going, and that was a big part of how I wrote The Rest of You. Do you want a little?
I would love to know
what the book is about. It'd be helpful, wouldn't it? So The Rest of You, it follows a woman called Whitney. She lives in London. She has a kind of, something happens and it triggers a kind of body memory in her of something that happens in her childhood. She doesn't know exactly what the memory is, but she kind of feels it in her body. She is a massage therapist, and so that's something that's quite important to her. And so we kind of follow her journey as she interacts with family and friends and tries to kind of uncover what this memory is and how it's changing her. And similarly, or kind of a dual then timeline, is in Ghana in the mid-1990s. You've got Whitney as a toddler, and there's three women that are taking care of her. Two of them are her aunties, and one is the house help. And an event happens, and the decisions they make after that event have ramifications for Whitney as an adult. So we're kind of following both timelines as they sort of converge to uncover this memory that she has.
I love it. And what I got the sense of when I was coming across your book is the fact that memory it's rooted in memory, right? Memory is basically the anchor of this story. And when we think about memory, it links naturally to imaginations, because what we remember, a lot of it is, us kind of filling in the gaps of our memory if it happened to us when we were younger. So I'm just keen to know, why was memory such a theme for you? Why were you interested in exploring memory in this way?
Yeah, it's definitely a personal project for me. Nothing in the book is real. I would preface that. But this idea of, I was born and raised in London, kind of like, back part of the Black British diaspora, but also Ghanaian heritage. And there are lots of gaps, I suppose, in the things that happened to my mother, my grandmother, my aunties before they came here. That kind of feed into who my identity and who I'm trying to figure out who I'm trying to be. And so for this, I wanted the character of Whitney has that experience of what the gaps are when you belong to a diaspora, and there are certain memories that actually don't really belong to you, and you don't necessarily have a right to know about, but actually in finding them, they can fill some holes in who you are, your identity, and understanding the people that have raised you. So that was a big part of why I wanted memory was so important in this book.
Thank you so much. Dean, let's come over to you. I would love for you to just introduce your work, but also specifically Person Unlimited and the story behind the book.
Absolutely. So, Person Unlimited is book number 6 for me. So I have written 2 poetry collections, and actually started writing as a spoken word poet, like Sarah, who we just saw, and that was kind of 10 years before I published a book. I was doing poetry, performing, and love doing that still. But when I published my first book, it kind of opened up opportunities within publishing and literature, and I followed those opportunities and kind of saw that having a book you get taken even more seriously as a writer, which is, just how things go. And so then, poetry, also young adult novels. So I write for teenagers, and I've also written a picture book, which is amazing. And all my books have black people on the cover, which makes me so happy. My picture book has a girl who looks like one of my nieces, and the story's about one of my nieces. But the other books all have a black boy or man on the cover, including this one. And Person Unlimited is actually a memoir, so it's actually about my own life. So everything in my book is true, which is scary. Like writing poetry, you can mask things in metaphor. You can kind of like disguise some of your true stories. And writing fiction, you can take from your life but put it into another character. Whereas in this book, I chose to face some of the real things that have happened to me because I felt ready. Some of the things in this book are kind of quite coming from a place of trauma, but similar to you talking about body memory, I wanted to work through some of the things that happened in my life with the body as the kind of central thing that holds the stories together. And more recently, in the last, say, 10 years, I've been doing more yoga, meditation, things like that. But beforehand, I was, using my body in lots of other ways, dancing, sex, whatever it may be. And we're also performing on stage, doing drag performances, which is a kind of theme of the book as well. And it's an ode to the body, my black queer body. So, all my writing has always kind of been to empower, uplift, or represent black people, queer people. And so when I came to this story, I was doing the same and focusing on kind of my story as opposed to imagined fictional stories. But my story intersects with generations of my family, so I had to talk to my mum a lot to get stuff about childhood right. We had to think about what was okay to share from family, stuff we don't talk about outside, So I had to strike a balance there, and I had to, the process, just quickly involved being in therapy, because it was like dealing with some difficult stuff, including a sexual assault that I experienced. So that was something I knew I wanted to write about because, we need to be able to be open about those things. Whether it's sexual assault, mental health, I write about quite openly too. Being with a therapist alongside me, doing that meant I felt safe all the way, and that was really important for me. And, as a reader, you'll feel safe because I manage the experience for the reader. I want to make it enjoyable, readable, and a page turner, as well as kind of processing some of these things for myself.
I love it. It definitely was a page turner, and kind of you described it as a memoir. And when I hear the word memoir, I expect a certain kind of book. I expect it to be like narrative in a very specific way.
Yeah.
So I opened your book and I felt like I got like sucker punched a bit. You know what I mean? In a good way, in terms of you are clearly telling the reader, this is not the kind of memoir that you expect. Yeah. I'm playing around, I'm doing my own thing, I am doing what the story requires. Yeah. In the description, it was described as formally inventive. Yeah. And I really love that framing of the book. So when we think about imaginations, when you were clear on what story you wanted to tell, what was the process of coming up with new rules and being imaginative and inventing a new way of telling that story?
I kind of borrowed from an old system, the chakra system. So it moves through the body from crown to root. And I knew that because I knew I wanted to start by writing about hair, and I don't have any now. But, I've had afro, cane row, dreadlocks, and that was my way into telling my story. So different hairstyles I've had and what they meant to me, my friends, my grandma, who didn't want me to have dreadlocks because, she had a lot to say about that. But also, just the different experiences being in the barbershop as a young gay man, and hearing things that made me uncomfortable, but still going back because they gave me a good haircut. And thinking about moving, because I thought that was really accessible, and I knew I wanted to kind of move through the body and get to some things that were kind of going to be, really, challenging, the sucker punch, so to speak, but also nourishing. I've got a whole section about the belly and food, and thinking about all the food from the cultures that I'm part of. My mum's family's from Cyprus, my dad's family's from Jamaica, and food is so important to both. And so I knew these parts of the body would tell give all the stories that I needed. And so sticking to that system of kind of working through the chakras was just, because I'd started doing meditation and yoga, it kind of really worked for me.
I love that. And final question before I move on to Echo. I'm really interested in the title and just understanding how authors arrive at the title, which is often the hardest part. So even when we're talking about imaginations and freeing ourselves and liberation, when you think about Person Unlimited, like how did you arrive there and how does it kind of encapsulate the story that you're telling in this memoir?
I arrived there because I think we can often be limited by people's perceptions of us, whether it's about our appearance, our education, our class, our family background, and I felt like I didn't want to feel limited by anything, and make my own rules and kind of like, when I was thinking about being a person unlimited, my editor wanted the title to stop there, but the rest of the title is an ode to my black queer body, because I wanted it to say black and queer in there as well. And so it's about, you can have labels, but they don't need to define you. Like I do see myself as, a black queer man, but I also, I am mixed race as well as black, but I'm also gay as well as queer. And in the book I explore those different labels and many more, because, we evolve, we change, sometimes things fit and sometimes they don't. But so being unlimited, is giving yourself permission to change many, many times over. And, if you meet someone that you're not seeing in a few years and they're like, you're so different, it's like, you're going to be different again. Like, I'm going to keep changing and evolving and growing, yeah.
I love that, perfect. Thank you so much. Echo, over to you. Again, I would love to kind of hear more about your work and this particular book and the story behind it.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here this afternoon. I'm Atta Ekow Eshun. I'm a writer and a curator. I spend a lot of time really thinking in a broader sense of things between where I write and how I create exhibitions. Very interested in Black aliveness. Very interested in the richness and complexity and sometimes strangeness of Black being and Black presence. Very interested in the ways that, from my perspective, we can't necessarily take for granted who we are, or more to the point, I feel that everything that has been said about us, there's yet further to go, because so much of what is said about us is refracted through someone else's gaze and someone else's imagining. So there's a necessary space of articulation, of wondering, of scripting, of telling stories, of re-seeing that I'm interested in. My book, The Strangers, is a non-fiction book. It takes the lives of 5 different Black men as a framework through which to explore blackness and being. Each of the figures of the book, some of them are well known, like Malcolm X or Frantz Fanon, others less well known, like a person called Matthew Henson, who was the first person to reach the North Pole in 1909, didn't get the credit. We meet each of our characters at a moment of crisis or crossroads in their lives. I'm less interested necessarily in what they did, not interested in kind of a heroizing story of them, more interested in how they felt. Toni Morrison talked about the ways that Black people are often the objects of history rather than the subjects of history. So I wanted to take her observation as a start point to think subjectively about the experience of these figures in this book. So I try and imagine my way into their lives. I try and see how they see. I try and walk the path that they walked, which means I have to construct and speculate about how they might feel. So within the bounds of non-fiction, I allow myself to imagine how they orient themselves in a world that is often hostile to their presence. I'm interested in that experience. What does it take as a person of colour, as a Black person, as a Black man, to walk through a world that often wants to confine you and define you, that often wants to say you don't belong, you should stay there. And with each of these figures, we see them sometimes reluctantly as pioneers, but all of them going into unforeseen territories, becoming exiles, becoming commonly othered and made strange by a world that doesn't quite understand or doesn't fully see them. The goal of the book in that respect is to see them, is to try and bring them alive, is to honour some sense of black aliveness.
I love that answer. And it's interesting that you describe it as non-fiction as well. In publishing, what we always try to do is categorize books. And I don't necessarily feel that this neatly fits into non-fiction. It is non-fiction, but it's kind of historical fiction. It's a beautiful blend of history and fiction. And you are spotting the gaps and you are filling the gaps with imagination, as you beautifully said. I'm really interested in knowing kind of two things. First off, how did you settle on who to focus on, right? We go from the early 19th century to kind of 20th century. Like, how did you pick these figures that are so kind of broad? Maybe we'll start there and then I'll follow up with the second question.
Yeah, so, I mean, the 5 figures in the book, we begin, as you said, in the early 19th century with a black an actor called Ira Aldridge, who was the first black person on the London stage, was the first black person to play Othello, because historically every other black person to play Othello had been a white person in blackface makeup. We move through these different figures: Matthew Henson, Polar Explorer, Frantz Fanon, Malcolm X, Justin Fashanu, who some people might know, the first gay footballer, black footballer. So diverse people in different places, different times. The thing that unites them is the experience that they encounter of being othered, of being made strange, of, in some respect, ending up in an exile condition with Malcolm X. You know, Malcolm X is not an unknown figure, but I was very interested in a specific week of Malcolm X's life after he breaks from the Nation of Islam. Malcolm X goes to Mecca, he finds himself in Islam, but after that, he actually kept traveling. So I was interested in Malcolm X in 1964 in Ghana. So he goes to Ghana for a week. So I'm interested in what version of Malcolm we find there, full of hope to some extent for how he might reinvent his life, but also burdened by an understanding that having broken from the people he's been closest to for the last decade or more of his life, he both has to reinvent himself in the consciousness that they also want to kill him. So, crisis, crossroads, each of these figures othered, made alien from themselves, each of these figures finding themselves as exiled presences, each of these figures having to orient themselves from the ground up, having to find a way to articulate who they are in terms of presence, in terms of belonging, in terms of finding a sense of home. Matthew Henson, who I talked about before, Polar Explorer, he was the assistant to a white American Polar Explorer. In the end, they go backwards and forwards to the North Pole for 2 decades. He ends up being more comfortable in Greenland, in the North Pole, than he does in Jim Crow era America. All of these figures trying to find themselves, and this is the thing that unites them.
That's fantastic. And in my mind, when we talk about imagination, it's one thing you using your imagination, and navigating that is hard enough, but you're almost co-creating with all of these different figures. Like, you're tapping into their imagination. Like, how did you go about that? Was it reading memoirs, biographies? How were you co-creating and creating something that felt, you know?
Yeah, well, so this thing, it's non-fiction in that the figures are real, the experiences they have that I describe are real, but I'm also conscious that I'm telling the story about these people. And I also have trouble anyway with kind of non-fiction notion that it's kind of veracity and truth. So I'm very conscious that the way I settled this, the way I tried to figure this out, do a lot of research, but in the end I ended up telling the story. I ended up telling the story of their lives in the second person. So we do not describe these figures as he, male figures, we do not describe them as he. I do not describe them as I, They are you. So all the way through the book, you are reading about you. This, for me, was a way of trying to think in and outside of their lives simultaneously. W.B. Du Bois, the great scholar of race, African-American scholar of race, coined a term about 100 years ago now, coined the term double consciousness. Double consciousness for Du Bois, he described it as the peculiar sensation of living physically within but psychologically outside white society. In a way, all of these figures are experiencing, encountering constantly this state of double consciousness, this sense of being looked at the entire time, even as they're also looking out. So you, that framing, that perspective, the second person, becomes a way also then to describe the experience of double consciousness, this sense of being physically within, but also standing outside at the same time. It makes us as the reader complicit in that process, but hopefully brings us closer to the duality of their lived experience. And sorry, just one final thing. Also, I'm in the book as well. In as much as in between each of these stories about these figures, there's also a set of essays which are really about me, kind of exploring and thinking more broadly about blackness and being.
Thank you so much. I've got a few more general questions, and then we're going to open it up. So if any of you have questions, please start thinking about them and feel free to raise your hand. I think there might be a roving mic. I could have made that up, but hopefully we can get some interaction from the audience. I think the beautiful thing about imagination is that everything is possible, right? So in terms of the boundaries that we have in the world that we live in, when you are starting with imagination, you don't have the same kind of limitation. So I would love to know, as you were each kind of approaching your books, like what kind of boundaries did you have to move beyond in order to kind of tell these stories in the way that the stories wanted to be told? We can start with you, Maame.
Yeah, I was going to jump off what you said about writing in the second person. Half of the book is written in the second person. Also,
Start in second person as well.
yeah.
Hey, I tell you what, did you get that thing? When you tell people, yeah, it's going to be in the second person, they give you this look.
See, it's like Marmite. Okay, some people love it, some people hate the second person.
I'm a fan.
They're like, get me away from this. But I think so. When I was writing the character, it came out in the second person, and that I like that imagination in terms of language is very much that, because I thought it fit Whitney very well, because I wanted to show her both inside her internal world, but also as if she's watching her life happen. And it feels uncomfortable when you read second person in that way. It's like she's talking to herself, and it's like you're watching through a peephole, and otherwise you're not supposed to be watching. It feels uncomfortable. It's supposed to feel like that. And I wanted that feeling because I wanted to show her disconnect between who she is, who she wants to be, who she thinks she is, and that I hoped that towards the end of the book, even though it's still in the second person for her, you feel her coming closer to herself. And that kind of, for me, that was the push of the boundary, but almost it just naturally came out like that, because then the other half of the book is written in the third person. And even though I write it from four different character perspectives on the whole, they all have their own kind of mode of movement. And I would say for me, most of my imagination came from obviously the Ghanaian parts of the book. So as I said, I grew up here. I've spent some time in Ghana, but I've not lived there. My mum checked over all my tree to make sure that the language is right. But also I had to go there if I hadn't gone there, I wouldn't have written the parts that were in Ghana, because I had to get the senses and imagine in that way.
It's also in the 90s as well, which is a different time. So
Yes.
it requires more imagination, more kind of filling in the gaps in that way.
Yeah, and for me, the fun part of that being in the 90s was thinking about like the music and the way that it was quite global, but in a different way at that time. And there's a whole sections in it that are about kind of R&B and soul, specifically from that time period and before, and how that filters through their lives, and the threads that kind of join diaspora, really, where I've said most of my kind of imagining went to.
Amazing.
So
my book opens in the second person as well, and that's talking directly to the body. So, the subtitle of the book is An Ode to My Black Queer Body, and I wanted to start by praising the body, to tell the body thank you, to be grateful for all it's carried me through, and then the rest of the book kind of unpacks that, but that's done in the first person. I'm talking you through those experiences that I've had, but I very much knew I didn't want to be writing for, what publishing calls Susan, which is this middle-aged, middle-class white woman. And I didn't want to be explaining myself. I didn't want to be kind of giving you lots of kind of glossary and explanation of all these terms. I wanted to just jump straight into it. So I imagined that I was telling the story to one of my friends who is also black and queer and a poet. I'll tell you his name, Keith Jarrett. You should look him up. He's an amazing poet and scholar now. So I had him in mind, not that I was sending it to him, I just knew, let me not think about the white man that's editing this book. Let me just think about my black friend who's also gay, that won't be shocked by the sex, by the assault, by the mental health struggle, by the, won't ask for the songs to be explained or any of the pop culture references, the black references, the food. Like, he will know it all. So I just immerse myself in the story and don't think about, who will and won't understand this. I'm talking to someone that gets it. And, from that place of kind of like familiarity, it actually all feels clear enough. And if there's a few things you don't understand, you'll be able to look them up and it won't be a problem. And so for me, it was imagining the reader being someone that gets it already and not trying to write for a middle-class, middle-aged white woman, because, that was the main kind of leap of imagination for me. And it freed me up. It freed me up, and in the end, there was hardly anything that needed to be explained or kind of expanded upon. It just worked because I believed in it, and it had authenticity and integrity in the storytelling.
That's incredible. And if anyone's writing a book, that is exactly the way you write a book. You don't kind of think about readers or try to over-explain, and you don't try to, curtail your imagination to fit a certain box. You just tell the story, and then you treat publishing as something completely separate. So wonderful. Echo, what would you say?
What's the
question?
Yeah, I've been listening to this.
I don't even know the question. I think it was.
Imagination.
Yeah, go for it.
Sorry.
So I think I was interested in, when you start with imagination, you're able to there are no limitations, right? You're able to do absolutely everything. So how did that kind of freedom feed into your
Yeah, I mean, I think I started the book somewhat out of frustration because there are lots of books that take being black and being male as a kind of fixed proposition. Do you know, if you look in bookstores, you look at Amazon, there are all sorts of books here, that's black man, let's do this, do that. I wanted to start with a question mark. I wanted to start with an openness. I wanted to start with an unknowing about what does it feel like to encounter the world, in this case, as a black man? What does it feel like to negotiate space, to articulate being with all its fragility and complexity and potential of richness? I wanted to start with a blank page rather than an assumption about who we are, how we live. Others already do that. I felt that the task was to begin in a radical unknowing, which means I had to build the world of these figures that I write about from scratch. It means I had to spend a lot of time. When I was writing the first chapter about our old age, I had to live in Regency London for some time. I had to live in the Arctic Circle for a while. I had to live in 80s Nottingham because Justin Fashanu ends up being managed by Brian Clough, who's the great manager of his period, who was unsympathetic to the idea of having a black gay footballer on his team. I had to imagine my way into these different worlds, and then I had to construct those worlds from the ground up. in order to get to the texture of those, in order then to get to the texture of the lives of these figures, in order to do some, hopefully, to speak with some fidelity about the interior lives of the people I was interested in. Which is also to say that some of these figures have, there's stuff written about them. Matthew Henson, this poet explorer I've been talking about, he wrote a memoir of his own. But what I was struck by was how much it didn't include about his own life, about his own feelings. I was struck by how bare bones it was. And so I wanted to fill in much of the space that I felt had gone unaddressed in the space again. It's not what people do, it's how they feel in that doing. This seemed to me the task.
I love that, and it's really interesting when you think about just the art of bringing things out. So like we all have ideas, right? We all have things that we want to do, or maybe books we want to publish. I'm really interested even in the question of like permission. So say for example, you have these stories, there is a gap. Who gave you permission to fill in that gap? I'm interested to know.
Well, that's good. There are two answers to that thing. There's one, the legal thing, which is really actually, they're all dead, so that helps a great deal. But also, and it's a really good question, because yes, no one gives me permission to do that. The role of the writer is to do that. One of the things I encountered, and it sort of comes up again with a number of these characters, Ira Aldridge, Matthew Henson, what happens when, historically speaking anyway, especially the further back you go in time, when black people write their own stories, Oluwadu Equiano I'm thinking about, for instance, who's also in the book, when black people write their own stories, there's a questioning that takes place about whether they really did write their own stories. Time and again, what happens when you encounter black memoirs is you realise that there's been a narrative around the world. Did they really write that? Did someone else write that? Did someone else speak their words for them? There's a kind of question about the authenticity or validity of those words. So I just decided, well, okay, look, I'm going to write a version of these stories. I don't know whether this is more or less true or faithful to their experience, but I feel, let me acknowledge the space, recognize the space, and then try and animate the space with a sense of possibility. Let's speak of black possibility. Let's speak of black fragility. Let's speak of black imagining. Let's speak of nuance and beauty. Let's honor these ordinary and in some ways also heroic figures by giving them the texture that often they are denied, by giving them the privilege of richness and nuance, of a ground that is unstable beneath their feet, not given, of a wind that prickles the skin on the back of their arms.
Oh, yeah.
Let's speak in those terms of them. Let's try and bring them alive.
I love that. That's wonderful. And even in terms of what you were saying, when we think about writing in itself is hard. I felt you were all like, Writing is hard. A lot of the themes that you all explore is kind of hard. The beauty of imagination is that it gives us space to flesh out our experiences and space for joy. I would like space for more than hard. I would love to know kind of, even when you think about Personal Unlimited and when you were approaching it, like how did you enable yourself to kind of find joy within all these kind of potentially like difficult stories that you're exploring as well?
I think because I was in a good place from beginning to write the book. So even though I knew I was going to go to some hard places, I knew I'd I was already on the other side. You know, I'd already done the work and had the support, you know, not just professional, like a loving partner, my family, you know, my friends, and I was able to kind of have the conversation so that this book wouldn't surprise anyone in my family, you know, or my partner. They needed to know what I was going to write about. And so having had the conversations, I felt that I was, in a place to be able to kind of really be extremely honest on the page. But I just wanted to mention about permission, because I feel like, you know, with this book, this particular publisher, Canongate, had been asking me to write a memoir for a while, and because I'd sent them a previous manuscript, The Black Flamingo, which is a novel in verse, but they were like, we can tell this is about you, can we make this a memoir, and can we, you know, tell more of your story? And I was like, no, this was like 2019, I wasn't ready. And so that came out. It's a fiction book, but it did everything it was meant to do as a book of fiction. You know, my picture book, Confetti, that one I got permission because I've got two nieces, you know, and two little black girls that, you know, there are many books now with black girls on the cover, but I was like to them, do you want one about you? And so I asked, you know, my sister, their mum, can I put them in this story? And she was like, yeah, absolutely. And they were at the book launch, and it was just amazing to have, you know, a story about them, you know, read out to a whole audience, and for them to be seen in a real way with their own names in a book. But my first book, The Permission, you know, actually came from outside. You know, that was, I've been doing spoken word, like I mentioned, and, you know, I was approaching other poets, older poets, and people I respected, and one of them was Benjamin Zephaniah. You know, and I went to him with some of my poetry on a CD, so I recorded me reading the poems, and I said, would you listen to this? And he was like, yeah, of course, and he took it, and then I wrote to him, because I hadn't heard back from him, I wrote to him on MySpace, because I didn't have his email, and then he messaged me back, said, I've just listened to it, actually, and it's really good, and he gave me some feedback, and said, keep going and keep sending me, and I kept sending him stuff, and then, like, you know, 3 batches of poems down the line, he was like, I think you've got enough for a book. You know, I was like, oh, book? Me? A book? And so he's like, you know, we get it together, I'll read it for you. You know, and he did, you know, and he gave me an endorsement for the cover. So the permission came from, you know, the great Benjamin Zephaniah to do a first book, because I wasn't thinking about it. I was thinking about standing up on stage performing. I never thought about doing a book until someone who was, you know, in the industry, you know, gave me that helping hand, because I was, you know, bold enough to give him my CD. So yeah, I think permission can come in many ways. You can give it to yourself. You can give it to yourself because you want to empower someone else, like the picture book for my nieces, or, you know, people can be nagging you to do something, and you just have to find the kind of courage and get into a good space to do it, you know.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I like that question of permission, because that, I think, the same, like with my first book, it was just me writing it for me. No one was waiting for it. Nobody cared. And then eventually, you know, it was picked up. But it was a joyful experience, because it was like a situationship, but bad luck. You know, it's young love, and it's kind of, you know, coming of age, and it was fun. It was really enjoyable to write. The rest of you was different, because it was in the pandemic. And again, I would say the permission, I gave it to myself, because it was a story that I think I have been thinking a lot about. This idea of going through a trauma. We all, you know these traumatic stories, or a story of getting through trauma. I wanted to focus on what happens after. What happens after the trauma? What happens after you, or when you're trying to get to the other side? You're not hitting it, you're actually trying to just get right, you know, on the other side and find yourself again. I wanted to explore that, and I think prior to I think I started writing in beginning of 2020, just before the pandemic really hit. I was thinking about it, and I thought, I don't think I would have been ready to write it before that point. I think the same as you. I was in a really good place. I was in Australia, actually. I was in a good place, and I had a lot of support, and I felt ready to go to these quite dark places. And there is some trauma in the book, but it's actually more about Whitney's experience and her personhood, and how she figures her way through these things. And also, I think I came up against it a lot. I had an agent at the time who, I think I was coming up against permission, to be honest. I think I was coming up against, well, you want it to be like this, but maybe it can be like this, or can it be here are 3 comparable titles.
Which is
Can it be like
publishing
these bestsellers?
Yeah,
Can it be
yeah.
like that? And I felt like that's not really what I was trying to do, and I kind of had to take it back myself
Yeah.
almost.
Wonderful.
And once I did that, and I got support from someone else who was like, "Oh, I really like where you're going with it," it just fueled me. And I think that happens a lot, especially when you're writing something for the first time. You kind of have to keep giving yourself permission. I think you have to keep giving it, especially if you try not to consider the publishing industry until you absolutely have to.
Exactly.
And it's just about the story, like you said.
Absolutely.
Then it becomes. That's when I think it starts to flow.
Amazing. I've got one more question before we kind of throw it out to the audience, and kind of sticking with you. In the description of the book, there was obviously the idea of Whitney kind of healing, like understanding where trauma is in the body and being able to heal. And kind of you were just talking now about what comes after trauma. So I'm really interested in kind of the role that our imaginations play in our healing process, which I think kind of in some ways speaks to kind of all 3 books. But specifically, I'm interested in this term healing, like in terms of, as opposed to like curing, right? Healing by definition requires imagination. It requires you to believe something. So I'm really interested into like, why was kind of healing something that was you were interested in exploring, and hopefully everyone can kind of answer that question.
I like the distinction, between healing and a cure.
Yeah.
Because healing, there's going to be a scar. Like you have, but you've accepted that almost. I think in terms of the imagination, when I think about healing, I think in terms of the book, I kind of think in memory, she's trying to fill in gaps in memory that she doesn't have, or in a history that she doesn't really know about. And she has somebody in her life, the woman that raised her, Ma Gloria, an auntie, who could fill in the gaps but is not, for her own personal reasons. And so I think for Whitney, her journey of healing was actually about, one, yes, imagining what would happen, what's happened in those gaps that I don't really know how to fill. So I'm just going to fill it with what I imagine happened or who I imagine was involved. But actually also, I suppose I found the biggest part of that healing came in her relationships with her friends and what she got from them or what it taught her about herself. And so I think some of that imagining came from them and what they proposed about what the future could look like if she listened to this friend or she listened to that friend or she took on board what was happening to them. So it was less kind of like, it was less her imagining this wonderful future and much more just imagining, okay, well, what happens if you were your whole self? What would happen if you just accept that these are the things that have happened, this is who you are now, this is how you come through it, and what happens if that's okay?
These are perfectly to Dean's book. What happens
Oh,
with your whole self?
if you're your whole self, yeah. I mean, and that was it, bringing together so many threads of my life. You know, whether it was like me doing musical theatre as a kid, meeting Michael Jackson, whether it was like going to Buckingham Palace and meeting the Queen and Joanna Lumley, you know, and like as a poet, and kind of then, you know, doing drag performance and, you know, being in this whole new world that I kind of had never given myself permission to go into, because I thought, you know, it was just, it was outside of my comfort zone drag, even though like I was out as gay from 15 and the only out kid at my school when I came out, and I didn't have the role models that there are now, you know what I mean? But it was just kind of consolidating all of these experiences and how, you know, along with kind of the interpersonal relationships, family, friends, romance, how it makes me the person I am, and just that my story deserves to be told, because I was always creating characters or kind of like hiding things in metaphor, and I was like, let me tell it plainly, this is me, this is what I've been through, all of this, like not just, you know, one strand or kind of like one interesting anecdote. It's like, how does this all come together, you know? And that's why I remember being at uni, for example, and like, you know, when you just share with randoms, you just get put in halls, yeah? And so there was this white girl that was in my halls who said, when these friends come around, you're like this, and when these friends come around like that, and when your black friends, you're like this, and if you're gay friend, and I was like, it's called code switching. What? Like, and it was just like, but it's like, this is a book about that.
Yeah.
Like, this is who I am in many different areas, and I'm giving you the kind of privilege to see it all, because not everyone gets to see all sides of me. But I think in the book it was safe, because it's like, well, you go take that away and make of it what you will. In real life, you may never see that much of me, and I think as a writer of memoir or non-fiction, yeah, you're doing quite a generous act of giving so much, because some people that know me wouldn't know most of the things about me that's in this book, and so, but it was beautiful, because now, in particular, not just the people that have read it, but the people that read the early draft before it was published, like my partner, my mum, like them seeing me with clarity, because I hid so much from my mum, like from my teens to my 20s, and once I wasn't living with her as well, it was easier to kind of live a life.
What did she think about the book?
She said, you took some risks. But I did too.
And you dedicated to mummy,
I
so
dedicated to mummy. I'm a mummy's boy,
Oh.
but it's nice for her to see
Yes.
all sides of me. And I think many of us, many people don't get to show their parents who they are in their entirety. So I feel that's one thing. And and I think that was a bold thing, but now it's happened. I'm like, yes, now I can really live. Because some people are waiting for relatives to die before they can be their true self, and I can't wait. I cannot wait for that to happen.
I'm happy you have decided not to wait. Ekow, what about you in terms of the healing aspect?
Yeah, I guess, okay, so yeah, two bits of the book that I'm thinking about. There's one essay, again, not the kind of central figures, but these other essays that I talk about, where I end up talking about hip hop. Interested in just a range of figures in hip hop, interested in Tupac, so the essay kind of follows Tupac's trajectory, does follow his trajectory towards some form of kind of self-realization. I was interested in a figure because I used to be a journalist. At one point I was interviewing lots of hip-hop artists. Very interested in self-aggrandizement that comes with hip-hop, the persona, the publicness of that, and then the fact that actually many of these figures also, in the end, as well as being performers, they're also poets, they're also artists. So my experience of talking to hip-hop artists, they are much different, they're fuller, but also more fragile, off stage. So I wanted to think about, okay, what does it take, or what's involved in always being consumed by your own persona, which is what happened with Tupac. He ends up living a thug life, he ends up in jail for sexual assault. So I was interested in what happens to him when, as a child, he was writing poetry and performing in ballet. The arc of his life that takes him into jail before he's killed, and where and at what points he finds some form of self-revelation within that. Also in that same chapter, I'm talking about Jay-Z, because I was interested in how Jay-Z ends up cheating on Beyonce.
Wow.
Exactly. What is it, dude? Where are you? So I wanted to think about these people and their inner lives and their own searches towards some form of revelation, healing, if possible. And then there's me as well. So the last chapter of the book is just about me. I mean, there's various parts of it, but it's just about me. It's my own journey. I end up in therapy. Some years, because how do we deal just with this 400 years of life, 400 years of othering, 400 years of misrepresentation, 400 years of being caricatured, of being confined, and the psychic toll that takes on each of us. So, because I was writing about this across these different figures and across time, it felt important, or at least relevant, to describe my own path, my own journey. The deeper you get, well, sometimes it gets difficult, but the goal is to meet yourself. The goal is to find yourself. The goal, hopefully, is to realize the full capacity to embrace yourself. recognise that that is both a solitary, necessary solitary journey, but it's also a journey that many of us in different forms go through, because it's either that or we remain isolated, or we remain exiled by a world that wants to misunderstand us, that wants to misrepresent us. So it's a good question.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that wonderful answer. Do we have any questions? I see a few hands up. I think we have time for 2, 3 max. Okay, we've got one question at the front.
Hi. I know we've already spoken a lot about healing, but I feel like Nancy already asked my question, if I was able to ask it. But I think this is more for Dean, but it's open to everyone. I know you said you were in a good place when you were writing the book, and it obviously addressed a lot of scenes in there. And I just wanted to know, was there still another form of healing during that process of writing the book and sharing your story? Because I know you said you were in a good place and you'd already spoken to your partner and your family and friends, but were there ever any aspects maybe that you hadn't touched upon until writing the book, until writing the draft? And I know you said beforehand you weren't ready and people had already asked you, would you be willing to write about those stories? How did you then decide, actually, I am ready now to talk about these things? And how did you know that you were healed, or were you not, and it was another form of healing, if that makes sense?
Absolutely makes sense. Yeah. So I think two things were going on. I think there was a kind of a healing, or a kind of a reconnecting with my inner child, because I feel like there was a lot that in my younger years that I felt ashamed of, embarrassed about, and kind of split myself off, almost like turned away from the things I was doing, but I was still doing them, but it was like I was drunk, or I was this, or I was that, and I was in denial about stuff. And so kind of returning to my inner child and saying, it's okay, you're safe now, and you've got a responsible adult, i.e. me, looking after you. And I think that was really, really a healing thing. But also, so then facing maybe where I had been let down as a child, and by whom, but also where I had been loved and supported, and an overwhelming kind of feeling of gratitude came up for the many mentors that I've had, the family members and people, chosen family, that kind of stepped in to fill the gaps that were not, filled in kind of like my biological family, so a lot of gratitude came up, and also compassion for my elders who would have been going through their own trauma, their own pain, and historically, both sides of my family come from, Cyprus and Jamaica both ruled by the British Empire at one point, and so there's a deep trauma there that I kind of get to. I don't think it goes into the full history of it, but just understanding that being in this country, we've kind of left our homelands on both sides of my family, and that is hard, and so I got a lot more compassion for my grandparents, what they were facing, and both of my parents, and a lot of reconnecting with my inner child, but a lot of gratitude for my elders and my mentors that kind of really have guided me and got me here, So no, it was a brilliant thing. Like, I cried a lot of happy tears as well as sad tears when I was writing this book, because I've been blessed, and it's lovely to be able to reflect on that. Name the people that you want to name in this book, because I didn't get here on my own, and it's wonderful to be able to, whether it's in the book itself or in the acknowledgements at the back, recognize how I'm sitting here right now, and how many people made sacrifices or kind of gave me, a helping hand up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have, there's a question.
Thank you. I just want to touch on the point where you mentioned about permission. So I just wanted to say to all of you up there is, before permission comes courage. After courage comes permission, and that's your permission to be great. I'm just thankful that you had the courage to be authentic, unapologetic, and write these books reclaiming the narrative which is for us. I just want to say thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's incredible. Thank you so much. I don't know if anyone has any kind of other questions. Well, I think that was a very kind of powerful. Oh, we've got one more. Okay. One more right at the front.
Me again.
It has
sorry.
no pressure, but it has to round everything up. It has to be a solid one, yeah?
That's okay. I just wanted to bounce off what was literally just said about permission. It's not a question, but it's also another token of appreciation about giving yourself permission to write these things and also seeking permission from other people. I've already found the courage to write a poetry book about mental health, and I didn't recognise that I'd given myself permission to share these poems with other people, but also get permission from other people to then be like, do you relate with this, and is it healing for you as well as it is for me? So it's also just another thank you for helping me recognise the process of giving myself permission, but also other people permission to, think about these things and imagine these things and write these things down as well. So that's
You didn't let me down, Sarah. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, panelists. Thank you for your fantastic answers. And just to reiterate, so you can grab a copy of the books and they'll be sold and signed in the mezzanine. And please remember, feedback forms, very important. So if you have a chance, please fill out the feedback forms. And 5 p.m., 5 o'clock is when the keynote, the main session is happening as well. So be back here at 5 p.m. Thank you, everyone.